Not a gateway drug. This is what the report said in 1944. And it doesn't lead to criminal activity. This was stated in 1944. And let me say something. This report was not conducted by United Weed Heads of Manhattan. It was done by the New York Medical Society. As the previous senators on the previous panel noted, racism has been a part of this issue from its inception in the United States, and even before that, one of the first country that sought the prohibition of cannabis on the national and international level was South Africa. So we don't even have to talk about the bona fides in terms of their racism. So given the fact that we have some time and the time is short, we'll just go through and I'll just have our panelists, one after another, make a presentation, and then we'll do some Q&A. So thank you. So if you could start.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It is an honor and a privilege to be here among my fellow panelists. My name is Melba Pearson. I am the Deputy Director for the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU of Florida. I'm also a former prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for 16 years in Miami-Dade County. I've had the advantage of seeing the criminal justice system up close, knowing what works, knowing what doesn't work, and now being able to apply my knowledge and my passion for making sure my brothers and sisters are not being corralled into an unjust system. I'm able to take that to my current work at the ACLU of Florida. When it comes to cannabis and communities of color, it is very clear that there are disparities in the way that this aspect is being handled. People of color are 3 times more likely to be arrested for possession of marijuana. However, African Americans, people of color, and white people use cannabis at the same rates. So that is something that we are trying to end across the country. Legalization is a great start, but it's not the end of it. So I will pass the mic on now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Shanita Penny. I am the president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. We are a trade association, but we are the only trade association focused on social justice. We know that the large trade associations of this industry are going to push for and work out our issues as it relates to banking, as it relates to taxes. What they're not going to consider are you, me, the people sitting in this room. They are not concerned about ensuring that A, that we have a place in the industry, or B, that our records are cleared, as this is now becoming legal in most of the states in this country. And finally, we need to ensure that there are business owners that are concerned with the products that we need from a health and medical perspective, health and wellness perspective, as well as the consumer goods. When this is fully legal, these businesses are going to come into our communities. They want a piece of our $1 trillion buying power. Well, we need to demand that we have products for us. We need to demand that they are reinvesting and rebuilding the communities that were devastated by the war on drugs. And we need to make sure that tax revenue is there to subsidize some of the licensing fees and things that you heard talked about earlier. It's very important that at this point, as Pennsylvania is on the brink of legalization, that we are at the table. And Senator Leach, a few years back, did something very important. He opened up what he called a regulatory palooza. And he invited anybody and everybody to come in and have a voice, a seat at the table. And that's how Pennsylvania ensured that there would be some focus on diversity in this industry. Maryland passed the same law. It said there should be a focus on diversity. When the application came out, there was nothing that identified the ethnicity of the applicant. In a state where over 1/3 of the population is Black, where 3 of the wealthiest counties in this country are, there are no minority owners from the first round of licensing. And through litigation, we now have a Black-owned processor who's going after a cultivation license, but that's not it. We're not taking crumbs. We're demanding our piece of the pie, and we are going to show up, not just because we're Black, but we are talented. We are resourceful people. Black women, you lead this country in small business ownership. You're under-resourced and you still get it done. So we're gonna bring that energy to the cannabis. We're gonna bring that energy to
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Lee, and I am Director of Government Affairs for the District Attorney's Office of Philadelphia. Prior to that, as was alluded to, I was the Executive Director and Co-founder of a legal aid organization explicitly dedicated to social equity, which is a little broader than social justice. The way I like to compare it is that social justice is making sure that every building has a door. Social equity is making sure that you have a ramp in case someone can't use the steps, or you have a button if someone can't push it open. So equity is also includes that access component. And it's one thing to perceive justice, and it's another thing to feel it and live it and know that it's a part of your life. And that is the perspective of the District Attorney's Office of Philadelphia since January. I'm very proud to be part of that administration. One of the first things that we did was withdraw prosecution for every open possession of marijuana case that we could find. In one weekend, there were over 55 arrests for marijuana possession, all people of color, and by Wednesday of the following week, they were all withdrawn, and those individuals were connected with legal aid organizations to expunge their criminal records. And I think I'll pass on that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marla Dickerson. I am a professor at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Southern University Law Center is one of 6 HBCU law schools in the country. I am new to this cannabis space. Back in May of this year, I was tasked by the Chancellor to develop and implement a course on law and medicine, which focuses on medical marijuana. In this space, the legal field is very conservative. But what ties it into social justice is really being able to introduce the field of medical marijuana to Black and brown students who then can take the knowledge that they gain in the course out and become entrepreneurs in different spaces, lobbyists to help change the laws dealing with possession and other criminalities that affect Black and brown communities, dealing with successions because we have a whole area of cultivation out there, probate in common law, whereby Black and brown folks do not do successions or transfer property after death. And so you have a whole aspect that if you want to become a cultivator, how to make sure that you are informing people about transferring those property rights down the line. So I am happy to be here. I am also on a learning curve. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dashida Dawson. I apologize. I'm the weed head. Yes, self-proclaimed corporate to cannabis crossover. I'm also a global legalization advocate and a medical marijuana patient. I joined the industry almost now, going on my 3rd year. I cannot believe it. And I did so really to legitimize, to stabilize, and to diversify the industry. I entered the industry as a consumer, as a patient, and I felt like, especially people of color, we were not really treated with dignity as patients, and that's generally across the whole industry, but it's even more so the case when we're already targeted, as our panelists already said, 3 times more likely to be arrested. To accomplish my goals, I founded MJM Strategy. We are a strategy and management consulting firm in the industry, essentially the McKinsey of marijuana. Prior to entering the industry, I went from Target to THC. I've led and I've managed multi-million-dollar brands for Target, for Victoria's Secret, and essentially entered the industry to leverage my skill set from corporate America to help the industry be re-educated or rebranded through re-education of consumers like yourself. Essentially, in the Black community, I feel like we have the most to go in terms of re-education. simply because we have the most fear to overcome. This is a plant that provides tremendous number of health and wellness benefits. And we don't know it because it's been illegal for 80 years. Before I jumped into the industry, before I became a businesswoman, I went to Princeton University and I received my degree in molecular biology. So I'm a scientist. And part of my role as it's been transitioning into industry has been to bring to the table a layman's term of how we should be communicating about the education of cannabis. I really focus on real science and not bro science. Bro science is what happens when you're passing the things around in a cipher and you know something's good, but you don't really know why. But there's real science behind why. So I've been, like Sharon said, I've been crisscrossing the country really trying to help people of color start businesses, but more importantly, I find that I am now a major educator for municipalities and legislators because they themselves don't know the science. Law is being made across the country, not only not including the social justice issue, but not including any of the medical information, not adjusting for what we now know. And so I spend a lot of my energy doing so, but teaching legislators what the real information is. In addition, I always bring to the table the fact that I'm from East New York, Brooklyn. I grew up on the war on drugs, and essentially I realized that it's more than just about the health and wellness issues. There are restorative justice needs that have to be addressed. They have to be. And I have to commend the work that's happened in Pennsylvania because it has at least leapfrogged. And I was just in New York the other day testifying for the New York Assembly, and I referenced Pennsylvania as a benchmark because they're still starting from Colorado. And we already know they F that up, right? Yes, I'm sorry, it's real talk all the time. And you have to deal with that because essentially we've been lied to so much within the industry, it's so hard for me to continue to kind of do a little bit of the political talk. There's a lot of things that we are pretty much kept in the dark about as it pertains to the science, but also as the legalization is happening. I have a sense of urgency, like all the people on this panel, and I'll end with this. The reason I have a sense of urgency is because there are things happening, and it's not just that the cannabis space is mostly white, and basically me and Shanita, I see her at every single event, also, holding up the fight and standing up for us. But it's because big business, the world I came from, is actually quickly moving in. Let me just tell you what just happened in the last 4 months real quick. And they don't care about black people, red people, restorative justice. They don't care about the poor veterans. They don't care about anyone but big business. Coca-Cola is interested, Estee Lauder is interested, Corona is interested. Their P&Ls dwarf the P&L of the business cannabis industry right now. Not too long ago, the FDA asked the DEA to reschedule a CBD drug. Well, the whole cannabis industry was celebrating for 2 days while I was palm-facing because they weren't seeing the tea leaves. They only rescheduled FDA-approved CBD drugs, of which there is only one by a large pharmaceutical company. And 2 days later, that pharmaceutical company then set themselves up to raise a cool $300 million on just the sales in this country on that drug. They got an HOV lane to success while we're in the trenches struggling, and you guys are just learning. So where does that leave us? Behind. And so we have a sense of urgency today for you to learn as much as you can, put to the past the myths, the things that you've heard, and listen about the health and wellness so we can improve our overall health as a community and also restore the communities that we all grew up in. Thank you.
If I could just follow up on a point that was made by the last speaker and put it to the panel for your ideas. On the issue of education and re-education or need for expansive education in the Black community, what are some of your ideas? There are very commendable exceptions. We have a Senator Street here in Pennsylvania. But for the better part, the religious leadership in the Black community is like, the political leadership, like particularly in New Jersey, is like, so what do you think should be done or could be done?
I'm going to be very brief because I know that there are other ideas here. I joined 2 organizations to get my initial information. I joined the Minority Cannabis Business Association, as a business owner, and I'm also the Chief Strategy Officer for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on the education and advocacy from the medical side primarily. I also launched a nonprofit organization specifically now that the market's opening up, the municipalities want to ready the market. Well, I launched it really with the minority community in mind, and that's the Cannabis Education Advocacy Symposium and Expo. And I, as a consumer marketer, I felt that we needed to have more consumer-based conferences that taught the health and wellness, taught the legislative issues and restorative justice opportunities, and then as the icing on the cake, if you want to get into business, here's that information as well. But we've got to start in that order. And so I would say those were the three organizations that you could look to. We also bring that to the churches. So I'm working in New Jersey. CEAS actually will happen in Newark, November 2nd and 3rd at the Newark Symphony Hall. But we have to go to the churches because they're not willing necessarily to come out when they hear the word cannabis. And I understand why. But since I grew up in a church, what I've done is I've started with my home church, St. Paul Community Baptist Church back home in Brooklyn, and it's helped me understand what some of the key questions are. And that is what I built that curriculum for CEAS around. And it really does start with explaining to them it's a health and wellness benefit.
You hit the nail on the head. Education is critical. And, you know, first things first, when we are talking about legalization is not just important for people who want to consume cannabis, who want to be in this space from a business and entrepreneurial standpoint. It's important for you to understand it as a member of the community. It's coming, right? And if you don't know that it's coming or you aren't proactive, then as a member of the community, resident or business owner, you are not at the table making sure that the tax revenue is spent where it should be. You don't even understand that there's now this consumer good that's legal, and you shouldn't be, you know, calling the police on someone. Police officers shouldn't be arresting you for these things. So the education is critical for members of the community. It's critical for law enforcement. And it's imperative that if you are interested in getting into this industry as a business owner, that you understand business. I would like to see money going to, and this can come from cannabis tax revenue or some other entity that's already doing business training for our community. We can't ask for, you know, prioritization and licenses if we're not prepared. You know, one of the things that's happening in California right now, people are so quick to say, oh, look at Oakland as a model, and let's do that. Let's ensure diversity and inclusion in the industry by prioritizing folks from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, folks that have had run-ins with the law, folks that are small business owners. You single out these groups and you say, we're going to give you these licenses, but you do nothing to prepare them. Business education is key. It will keep you from being taken advantage of by large corporations coming into this space who look at your priority and say, oh, this is a business opportunity, who are not truly in it to ensure that you have a place in the industry. So they'll jump in and help you get in because now they're in. They're going to do nothing to ensure your success. And when you flounder out in a year and you're gone, they're in exactly where they plan to be and ready to take off. So education is critical, but business education and some of the resources that we are providing are where I think we will benefit most as it relates to staking our claim.
Super quick. Also, one of the things I like to say is the best kind of voter is an educated voter. So there is a whole other component. As legalization comes, what are we doing for the communities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs? The $3.6 billion that is spent nationally on this failed war on drugs. Is there going to be the sealing and expunging of your cannabis history? Will you be able to even enter the industry as an owner or even work at the front counter because of the fact that you have a particular criminal history? I mean, I'm definitely going to hold out Philadelphia as a model because the voters were educated by the ACLU of Pennsylvania on the issues. What does criminal justice reform mean? What does it look like? and measure that up against the candidates who are running. And the voters in Philadelphia made it loud and clear, made it clear who they wanted and what direction they wanted their criminal justice system to go into. So that's something that's very critical as we move out through the rest of Pennsylvania and start looking at legalization. What are the district attorneys doing to keep up with this? What is law enforcement doing? Are they just going to, keep up, or are they gonna still use the, oh, I smell marijuana, and kind of try to use that as a pretext to look for other charges to put on somebody? So these are things that the voters need to be educated about so that we can make educated and good decisions for our community.
So, in trying to legitimize and bring credence to issues surrounding cannabis, I think one of the most important things is that you have to get educational institutions involved. Having schools of law, colleges of law, schools of business, schools of nursing, medical schools involved, and partnering with these nonprofit organizations really helps to take away the stigma associated with cannabis. And so that's one of the things that I do in my class. When I have speakers who come in who have nonprofit organizations, I try to invite outside folks, community members, to come in, sit down and listen. So again, they can have some idea of the respectability that goes along with cannabis. It's not just someone who is coming in to get high, or as the senator says, someone named Green who is in the back trying to, sell cannabis in a way that, in a traditional sense, that people are used to having cannabis being broached, the subject of cannabis being broached. So I think that it's really important to create alliances and partnerships with universities so you can, again, legitimize the conversations in the Black community about cannabis. So you can talk about the criminalization, you can get voter education reform, you can talk about health and wellness. So people can understand that there are real benefits into getting involved in this business.
I'm going to say I have 1 cent. I got 2 cents as long as I have 1. In addition to educating the legislators about this, it's also pivotal that judges and, even more importantly, county correction officers get a much better understanding of breaking down the stereotypes around marijuana or cannabis and it being a gateway drug. When I grew up, I was told to be very afraid of cannabis, and it was the easiest way to get pulled into the criminal justice system. And my parents explained it to me not as much as a gateway to more narcotics, but as a gateway for police interactions. And the real fear and danger came from those police interactions. Right now in Philadelphia, we're trying to get our community corrections, both state parole and probation, to no longer violate people who test positive for THC, so that that population has the same rights and respect that the rest of the citizens of Philadelphia have, where they should only be issued a city violation notice and not be arrested. And it's very unfortunate that even since 2015, when this ordinance went into effect with then Councilman Kenny, now Mayor, and even since our office has declined, stop charging and prosecuting people, we still have to decline charges on a near daily basis of someone being arrested and brought into police custody because of cannabis. So changing that stigma of this is my way to bring someone into the criminal justice system, I think is a vital step in all the other educational components that have been raised by this wonderful panel.
I'm gonna open it up to some questions, because we have a very diverse panel with a lot of different kind of expertise. But I have a question issue that I want to put before the panel. 2 words that you rarely hear together, although they have had a resonance in the Black community, one going back to post-Civil War times, one very clearly in the 20th century, and that's reefer and reparations. Is this an issue that can reparations be fashioned around? Because one of the issues when you start talking about reparations and there's a legitimate talk about it, the thing that always comes up is that, well, there's no longer any identifiable victims, so how can we give reparations for post-slavery? But here we have an issue that has been racially impacted from its very inception. And as Mr. Lee, you're saying that the police, irrespective of decriminalization in Philadelphia, are still making arrests. So what do you think about reparations and REPA? I asked that question, or I posed that question to a reparations group, and it was almost like, well, it went over like a lead balloon. Say something about something that comes from your body when you exhaust some gas, but they wasn't having it. But I just want to hear some of your reactions.
Well, first, I'm gonna put my lawyer hat on and just talk about restoring victims to a whole. And that's something that we do as prosecutors, and that's one of our main goals in the DA's office in Philadelphia. So I think that any bill that legalizes cannabis should include automatic expungement of prior convictions. And I would say that would apply to both the distribution as well as I have my intern Tom run some numbers for me for the 9 states plus District of Columbia that have all passed a decriminalization and legalization bill, and only one has for automatic expungement. That's California. There are 2 that have an expungement provision, but the burden is on the victim to file that petition in court, which I also would assume leaves to the discretion of the judge and their biases as to whether or not someone is worthy of that relief. So that's so-so. And then the remaining 7 or 70% only do sealing. And the difference between sealing and expunging is destroying or hiding. So when you hide it, it's so someone else can go seek it. And that someone else will probably be law enforcement or medical marijuana professionals. So I would say that the reparation step 1 is making sure those identified victims are harder to identify moving forward. Step 2, and this is just from attending the events today, is if we do have revenue being generated from the legalization, then proceeds from that should be directly funneled to people who have lost their freedom as a result of the war on drugs. And what that reparations looks like, I think should not be handled by criminal justice or law enforcement people such as myself, but is more appropriately handled by public health professionals, public education professionals, and a myriad of other social service providers who are much better equipped. And my fear is that if you, to quote my boss, if you let the same people that drove you into the ditch drive you out, don't be surprised when you're stuck.
On the topic of reparations, I want my 40 acres and a mule. And we've seen other groups without records or this data that they're saying victims aren't alive, they're not traceable. I want my 40 acres and a mule. On the topic of cannabis, I don't typically use the word reparations. I use words like restorative justice, equity, and equitable industry. And when you ask for those things, we have the data from the war on drugs. We know which communities were impacted. We know the people that were impacted. And so with that being said, this industry will generate a ton of revenue. I'm not looking for a handout. What I am looking for is legislation that allows for diversified licenses. Everybody shouldn't have to have a $25 million business. Right. And so when you diversify the license, you open it up for people to come in and get their piece of the pie. We're not asking for you to give us anything, right? Invest in us. Because what happens when you have diverse leadership on boards, regardless of industry, companies perform better. So what we're asking for is for you to do what's right so that we can make this a better industry.
And just to piggyback on that, when we think of reparations, we think of 40 acres and a mule, and it's sort of like in present day terms, you're thinking about a check, right? That somebody's gonna write you a check and be like, yeah, sorry, we didn't mean to do that. Or actually we did, but we got caught, so here you go. But I feel like, kind of from a biblical sense, like, you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, you teach a man to fish, he can eat for a lifetime. So if that money, instead of just being checks, were invested as in micrograms. So if you wanted training on how to open up, a dispensary, or training on how to be a grower, or you need that seed money to be able to start your own facility, you're able to go and get that. I know you can't go to Bank of America or Wells Fargo and try to get a loan to start your business. I know in Florida, just to file the license, the application to get the license is $60,000. And with that application, you have to have architectural plans. You've got to have security plans of how you're going to make sure that the business is secure.
You have to have a $5 million bond.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I know, I don't do too badly, but I certainly couldn't apply for a license in Florida, so think about somebody else who's in a different place in their life, just getting out of prison as a result of the war on drugs. How are they supposed to get into the industry? So, reparations to me is being able to get into the industry and being able to have the funding, that venture capitalism, to be able to move forward so that you can be an equal partner in this.
I want to agree with what everyone said, because when you think about the historical context of 40 acres and a mule, it was done to put African Americans who were coming out of slavery on equal playing field with their white counterparts. So again, I think that if you want to talk in terms of reparations, restorative justice, you have to try to find some way to level the playing field economically, financially. And so the only way to do that would be to have lobbyists, have legislation written whereby you include diversity components into that legislation, whether it's some type of educational programs, training programs, financial backing programs, just things that would help level the playing field for persons of color in the cannabis industry.
I'm going to ditto everything that they just said, and I will point out some things as it's in the work that we're doing. Even in Florida, Minorities for Medical Marijuana went back in, changed sort of way the law was being put together, and now for every new medical marijuana patient that comes on board and pays to the state, I believe $5 goes back to FAMU. And so those are the type of reparations, if you will, that doesn't go directly to an individual, but is feeding the very schools that, in many ways have been neglected by the United States, even neglected by our own communities. And so it goes directly back to them. I'm a science major, and one of the things that I really want to